All right, listeners, ready for a deep dive? Today we're going right to the heart of Europe's future.
Sounds exciting.
Oh, it is. We've got a whole stack of documents, and let me tell you, they paint a bold vision for boosting European competitiveness and innovation.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of documents?
It's a proposal, actually, and the core of it. This really interesting concept called EU Inc.
EU Inc.
Yeah. Imagine a company structure, but it's standardized, it's all digital,
Yeah.
and it works across all the EU countries, like as smooth as ordering something online.
That's a pretty big idea.
Big, and with the potential to be a real game changer. We're talking about potential impacts on the entire EU, individual countries, businesses, and even everyday people, you and me.
Wow. Okay, so where do we even start with something this big?
Well, the proposal itself looks at things from a lot of different angles,
Yeah,
recognizing that it needs to work for everyone.
makes sense.
So let's zoom out to that biggest picture first. The European Union as a whole. What could they gain from something like EU Inc.?
The documents paint a picture of a much more unified business landscape, one that's attractive to investment and talent from all over the world, like raising Europe's game on the global stage.
Okay, so stronger, more vibrant EU, and that's all driven by businesses.
Yeah. But to get there, there are some big hurdles. Right now, Europe lags behind, say, the US in venture capital and the number of successful startups that really scale up.
Right, so how does this EU Inc. actually address that? What are they proposing?
One of the core ideas is digital first. Imagine one online platform, they call it the EU registry, and you can handle everything there. Company registration, documents, shareholder info, all of it. All digital, all across the EU.
So instead of dealing with different systems in every country,
Gone. It's about cutting bureaucracy and making life way easier for businesses, especially if they work across borders. They even talk about this once-only principle, submit information once, and it's shared automatically with everyone who needs it.
oh, no more drowning in paperwork. That's every entrepreneur's dream come true.
Exactly. It's creating a business-friendly environment, but also pushing that digital mindset that companies need these days.
So less red tape, more tech savvy. What else does EU Inc. have in store for businesses?
Well, there's this concept called the EU dashboard. Imagine a control panel, but for your entire company. Cap table stuff, share transactions, documents, compliance tasks.
Like a one-stop shop to manage everything.
Exactly. And it connects directly to that EU registry, so everything's streamlined. From raising money to reporting, manage your company from anywhere in the EU.
Sounds pretty powerful. Like EU Inc. is really trying to help businesses succeed.
Absolutely. But it's not just about convenience. It's also about transparency. All that information's public, so it builds trust. Investors can do their due diligence easily.
Okay, so we've got the digital base, the management tools. But what about the money? The funding gap for European startups.
That's where it gets really interesting. They're proposing a new investment tool called EU Fast.
EU Fast?
Yeah, it's kind of like a standardized, streamlined version of those SAFE agreements that are big in the US.
Oh, so startups can raise money more easily without getting bogged down in complex equity rounds.
Precisely. EU Fast is designed to be flexible, good for founders, and attractive to investors both locally and internationally.
So it's removing obstacles, making it faster for startups to get the capital they need.
Exactly. And because it's standardized across the EU, the hope is it'll attract more investors overall, boosting the whole startup scene.
Win-win for everyone then.
Yeah.
But let's not forget the people who actually make these companies work, the employees.
Right. That's where EU ESOP comes in, a standard employee share option pool to attract and keep talent.
Like those employee stock options that are so common in, say, Silicon Valley.
You got it. But EU Inc. adds a twist. Profits from share sales. They're treated as capital gains, taxed lower than regular income.
Oh, that makes a big difference. Much more attractive for employees.
It aligns their interests with the company's long-term success. It's about shared ownership and shared success.
So EU Inc. is tackling bureaucracy, funding issues, employee incentives. It's a pretty comprehensive vision, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's trying to address a lot of the systemic problems that have held Europe back.
But of course, no plan is perfect,
Mm-mm.
right? There are always going to be potential downsides and complexities.
Oh, definitely. And that's what we'll get into next. We need to look at the potential challenges from different perspectives, the EU, individual countries, businesses, and even citizens. And we'll examine those pitfalls that the EU Inc. creators themselves have highlighted. Okay, so we've talked about the potential benefits of this EU Inc. idea, less bureaucracy, a digital-first approach, new funding mechanisms. But the real question is how it would actually impact everyone involved.
Exactly. And whether it can really overcome the real-world challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Like, an idea can sound great on paper, but be a nightmare to actually implement.
Totally. So let's imagine we're the EU as a whole looking at this. What are our hopes and concerns? What are we worried about?
Right, because the E's got their own goals, right?
Oh, yeah. Their big goal is clear. They want to make Europe a global powerhouse, a place that's attracting investment and talent from everywhere.
So, like, boosting Europe's standing in the world.
Exactly. But to get there are some serious balancing acts they got to pull off.
Okay, what kind of balancing acts are we talking about?
Well, one big one is making sure that all 27 member states implement this consistently. Imagine some countries dragging their feet or doing things differently. That totally undermines the whole point of a unified framework.
Right, because then it's like taking one step forward, two steps back. You need everyone on board moving in the same direction.
Exactly. The EU has to show a united front to the world, show they're serious about making this work. And the proposal itself actually emphasizes that, urging member states to resist the temptation to add their own little tweaks or exceptions.
So it's not just about new rules, it's about everyone buying into this shared vision.
Yep. And speaking of different viewpoints, let's shift to individual member countries for a second. How do they see EU Inc. and what kind of unique challenges do they face?
It's got to be different for every country, right?
Yeah.
Especially those with smaller economies or who are just starting to build up their startup scene.
Yeah, for smaller countries, especially ones that haven't been able to attract much investment, EU Inc. could be a game changer. Like suddenly the playing field is leveled. Any country can become a hub for EU Inc. companies.
So it's like they're suddenly connected to this big European network with all this new potential.
Exactly. But they've also got to step up and make sure their laws and systems are ready for this. They got to invest in digital infrastructure, make sure their workforce has the right skills.
It's not just about sitting back and waiting for the benefits. They've got to be proactive.
Absolutely. And that might mean making some tough decisions, streamlining regulations, investing in education, even challenging some old ways of doing things.
Okay, so we've looked at it from the EU level, the country level. Now let's zoom in on the businesses themselves. What are their hopes and fears about EU Inc.?
I think the benefits for them are pretty clear. Less bureaucracy, easier operations across borders, new ways to get funding, and a more predictable set of rules.
So it's like removing all those roadblocks that have been slowing European companies down.
Yeah, especially the ones who want to grow internationally. But there will definitely be challenges too. Some businesses will probably be hesitant to jump into a new system until they see it working.
That's understandable, right? If things are working fine now, why change?
Exactly. And that's where communication and education come in. The EU needs to do a good job explaining how EU Inc. works and addressing those concerns. And different businesses are going to have different needs too. What works for a small startup might not work for a big corporation.
So the EU needs to make sure EU Inc. is flexible enough for everyone.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about the EU, countries, businesses, but what about the most important group, the people, the citizens of Europe? How would they be affected?
Yeah, because in the end, it's about their lives, right?
Right. At its core, EU Inc. is about creating a European economy that's more prosperous and dynamic. And that means good things for people, more jobs, better wages, more opportunities to start businesses, a better quality of life, basically.
So if businesses are doing well, everyone benefits.
Exactly. But those benefits won't happen overnight. It's going to take time, investment, and it's important to address those potential challenges we've been talking about.
And being transparent about it all, too.
Yeah.
People need to understand what EU Inc. is, what it aims to do, and how it could affect them.
Absolutely. Their voices need to be heard throughout this whole process. The EU needs to make sure EU Inc. is implemented fairly so it benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Okay, we've talked a lot about the potential upsides, but let's not forget the potential downsides. What could go wrong? What are the EU Inc. people themselves worried about?
Well, one concern they raise is that EU Inc. could end up benefiting big corporations more than smaller businesses. Like,
Right.
they're specifically warning against a system where big companies can find loopholes or game the system to get an unfair advantage.
So it's about making sure everyone plays by the same rules and preventing EU Inc. from becoming a tool for big companies to just get bigger.
Exactly. And to do that, you need careful planning and oversight. The EU has to constantly monitor how EU Inc. is being used and make adjustments to ensure things stay fair.
Another concern is that different countries will implement it differently, leading to fragmentation. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth emphasizing. If each country does its own thing, it kind of defeats the purpose of having this unified framework.
Right. It's a classic EU challenge balancing the need for harmonization with the reality that every country has its own system and interests. The success of EU Inc. really hinges on finding that balance.
And then there's the risk of just, unintended consequences. Anytime you change a complex system like this, there's always the possibility of things happening that you didn't foresee.
Exactly. So being flexible and adaptable is super important. The EU needs to be prepared to monitor how EU Inc. is working, get feedback, and make adjustments as needed.
It's like navigating a ship.
Right.
You got to constantly adjust your course based on the conditions.
Exactly. And speaking of navigating, let's actually dive into some of the specific tools and mechanisms that EU Inc. proposes. We talked about the EU registry and EU dashboard, but let's take a closer look.
Let's start with that EU registry. What exactly is it, and why is it so central to this whole EU Inc. idea?
Think of the EU registry as the digital heart of EU Inc. It's this one central platform where businesses can handle everything related to their corporate governance. Registering the company, filing documents, managing shareholder info, complying with regulations, all of it.
So it's like a one-stop shop, but all online, for all things EU Inc.
Exactly. And it's designed to be really easy to use. Remember that once-only principle. That's a big part of it.
Right. You submit your info once, and it's shared automatically. No more duplicate paperwork.
Exactly. But it's not just about convenience for businesses. The EU registry also increases transparency. All that company info is publicly available, so investors, regulators, even citizens can easily see what's going on.
That builds trust, right?
Yeah.
Everyone can see things are being done above board.
Totally. And it helps to level the playing field. Smaller companies have access to the same info as the big guys.
Okay, so we've got the EU registry for centralizing all the governance stuff. What about the EU dashboard? What does that do?
The EU dashboard is like your personalized control panel for your EU Inc. company. It's where you manage everything, share transactions, cap table management, document creation, compliance tasks, all of it.
So it's a whole set of tools to make running the company as smooth as possible.
Precisely. And it's all linked to the EU registry, so your data is always consistent and up to date.
They really seem to have thought about making this whole thing user-friendly, haven't they?
Yeah, it's a smart move. By making things easy and intuitive, they're hoping more entrepreneurs will be willing to try out the EU Inc. model.
And it reinforces that whole digital-first mindset, which is essential these days.
Totally. The EU dashboard is a great example of how technology can be used to empower businesses and make them more competitive.
Okay, let's talk about money now, that whole funding issue. EU Inc. introduces something called EU Fast. What's that all about?
So EU Fast stands for European Union Fast Advanced Subscription Template. It's basically a streamlined investment agreement that's specifically designed for early-stage companies.
It sounds like they're trying to create a European version of those safe agreements, the simple agreements for future equity that are so popular in the U.S. startup scene.
That's exactly what they're doing. EU Fast is inspired by SAFEs and other similar agreements like the BSA-ARR in France or the Advanced Subscription Agreement in the UK. The goal is to make it easier and faster for startups to raise money in their early stages without all the complexities of a traditional equity round.
So it's all about removing those barriers, making it simpler for startups to get the funding they need to grow.
Exactly. And because it's standardized across the EU, it also makes things more transparent and predictable for investors, which could lead to more investment overall.
And one of the cool things about EU Fast is that it's not actually a debt instrument, right? It's more like a convertible security that converts into equity later on, like during a future funding round.
That's right. This avoids all the headaches of debt financing. Things like interest payments and maturity dates, which can be a pain for early-stage companies.
And it lets investors participate in the company's success without having to figure out a specific valuation right away.
Exactly. It's a win-win for everyone, giving both founders and investors flexibility and aligning their interests.
So EU Fast is all about speed and simplicity in early-stage funding. What about employee ownership? How does EU Inc. address that?
Well, they propose this standardized employee share option pool called EU ESOP. It's all about incentivizing and retaining talent.
Kind of like a Europe-wide version of those employee stock option plans we see a lot in the U.S.
Exactly. The idea is to create a level playing field across the EU so companies can easily offer share options to their employees.
And that's especially important for startups, right? Because they often use equity to attract top people when they don't have a lot of cash.
Absolutely. EU ESOP could be a game changer, helping them compete for the best talent globally.
And a cool feature is that profits from selling those shares are treated as capital gains, not income, right?
That's right. And capital gains are usually taxed at a lower rate.
So that makes participating in an EU ESOP a lot more appealing financially.
Totally. And it also aligns the interests of employees with the company's long-term success because they directly benefit when the company's value goes up.
So EU ESOP is a win-win for both the company and the employees. It's about creating a culture of shared ownership and shared success.
It's a great way to attract, motivate, and keep those talented people on board.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. Let's do a quick recap of the main features of EU and what they mean for everyone involved.
Sounds good. Let's pull it all together.
First, we have the EU registry, this all-digital platform that streamlines everything and makes things more transparent. It's a huge change for businesses, investors, and regulators.
Then there's the EU dashboard, which gives companies the tools to manage everything online, from share transactions to creating documents. It's about making them more efficient and effective.
We also talked about UFast, which makes early-stage funding faster and simpler. It's a win for both founders and investors and helps create a more dynamic startup scene.
And last but not least, there's EU ESOP, which standardizes employee share options across the EU, helping companies attract and retain top talent by giving them a piece of the pie.
So basically, EU Inc. is trying to tackle a lot of the issues that European businesses face, from complicated regulations to funding gaps to finding the right people.
It's a bold plan for a more competitive, innovative, and prosperous Europe.
But as we've said, it's not going to be easy. Getting everyone on board and making it work in practice is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and there's always the risk of unintended consequences, like those loopholes that bigger companies might try to exploit.
So careful planning and oversight are going to be crucial to make sure everything stays fair and balanced.
Absolutely. But despite those challenges, the potential rewards are huge. If EU Inc. works, it could completely transform the European business landscape. Imagine attracting investment, talent, and innovation from all over the world.
It's a story that's still unfolding, but definitely one worth following.
For sure.
Okay, before we move on, let's take a moment to think about a slightly different aspect of EU Inc. Something that's not explicitly written down, but more like a general vibe or approach.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's about more than just creating a new company structure or making things simpler. It's about a whole mindset, a way of thinking about business that's more flexible, adaptable, and focused on the future.
I see what you mean. It's about embracing change, breaking down old barriers, and giving entrepreneurs the power to create something new.
Exactly. The words they use in the proposal, digital first, simplifying, streamlining, unleashing potential, it's all very dynamic and optimistic. It's a breath of fresh air compared to the usual corporate jargon.
It's like they're trying to inject some of that Silicon Valley energy into the European business scene.
Yeah, and that's what makes this so exciting. It's not just about changing the rules, it's about creating a whole new culture of innovation and entrepreneurship.
A culture where people are willing to take risks, collaborate, and think globally.
And that, my friend, is the real heart of EU Inc. It's a vision for a more dynamic, competitive, and ultimately more successful Europe.
It's a vision that's definitely worth pursuing, even if there are challenges along the way.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's leave our listeners with a final thought, something to ponder.
Hit me with it.
Imagine a world where EU Inc. has become the gold standard for how companies are structured, not just in Europe, but everywhere. What would that mean for business and innovation?
Whoa, that's a big question. If EU Inc. can really deliver on its promises, simple governance, a digital-first approach, a focus on attracting investment and talent, it could definitely become a model for other parts of the world. Imagine starting and running a business as easily in any country as you can in your own.
It would change everything about global commerce, breaking down barriers, creating opportunities for companies of all sizes to thrive, and leading to a more connected, more prosperous world.
It's a dream worth chasing, even if it sounds ambitious. EU Inc. could be the start of a whole new era for global business, one that's driven by innovation, collaboration, and a shared desire to create a better future.
And on that inspiring note, we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into EU Inc. Hopefully you've got a better grasp of what this could mean, the benefits, the challenges, the impact.
Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll look at some of the specific concerns that the EU Inc. creators themselves have raised and explore what could go wrong if those aren't addressed.
All right, welcome back to our EU Inc. deep dive. So far, we've explored the potential benefits, the challenges. We've even looked at it from different perspectives, the EU, countries, businesses, citizens.
It's been a pretty comprehensive look, right? A vision with a lot of potential to change things in Europe.
Definitely. But like we said, no plan is perfect. And even the people behind EU Inc. have pointed out some things they're worried about, potential problems they want to avoid.
Oh, that's interesting, like a what could go wrong kind of thing.
Exactly. It shows they've really thought this through, tried to anticipate pitfalls so they can be avoided.
Smart move. I'm curious, what are some of the things they've flagged?
One big concern is that EU Inc. could become too focused on startups. They're worried about defining startup too narrowly, which could actually exclude some innovative companies or create weird incentives.
Right, because if you make the definition too strict, you might miss out on some really cool companies that don't fit perfectly into that box.
Yeah. And then you might get bigger companies pretending to be startups just to get those benefits.
Oh, trying to game the system.
Exactly. They know about that risk that companies will try to find loopholes and exploit them. It's a good reminder that any new system has to be carefully designed to prevent those unintended consequences.
Makes sense. So what else are they worried about?
Another thing is the temptation to just pile on all sorts of government benefits for EU Inc. companies, tax breaks, grants, special exemptions.
I see their point. Too many incentives can actually distort the market and make it unfair.
Right. And it could lead to pushback from those existing companies who don't qualify for those perks. Not a good look, and could create a lot of political problems.
It's a tough balance, isn't it? You want to encourage startups and innovation, but not at the expense of fairness for everyone.
Exactly. And it looks like the EU Inc. people understand that, which is a good sign.
Yeah, definitely. So any other red flags?
Another big one is that each country might implement EU Inc. differently. They really stress the need for a single unified standard across the entire EU.
Right, because otherwise it defeats the purpose of having a harmonized framework. If every country starts tweaking the rules, it'll be a nightmare for businesses that work in multiple countries.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's like building a house with a bunch of different sized bricks. Might look kind of cool, but it's not going to be very stable.
Right. A single standard is crucial for making things predictable, keeping things simple, and building trust. It's about a level playing field for everyone.
Makes sense. And the last thing they really emphasize is keeping things simple, avoiding unnecessary bureaucracy. Like they specifically mention reducing the role of notaries in basic tasks.
Oh, yeah. That's a pain point for a lot of businesses. Having to go through all those extra steps just adds time and cost.
Exactly. They want a truly digital-first approach where everything is streamlined and efficient.
Love that. It shows they're serious about empowering businesses, not bogging them down with paperwork.
They even give examples like Portugal, where notaries are still involved in a lot of things, even when they're not strictly required.
It's a reminder that sometimes changing mindsets can be just as hard as changing the actual rules.
Totally. Okay, so to sum up those concerns, narrow definitions, too much government intervention, different countries doing things differently, and unnecessary bureaucracy. It's pretty impressive how self-aware and cautious they are.
Yeah, I agree. It shows they've thought about the potential problems and are really trying to make this a solid, sustainable framework.
It's like they're saying, look, we've learned from the past, and we want to get this right.
That's a good attitude to have. So, as we wrap up this whole deep dive into EU Inc., what are the key takeaways for our listeners? Why should they care about this?
Well, I think EU Inc. could be a turning point for Europe. It's trying to solve some of the big problems that have held back innovation and competitiveness. If it works, it could unleash a whole wave of new businesses, attract investment from all over, and create a much more dynamic and successful European economy.
Yeah. It's not just about changing the rules. It's about changing the whole mindset, the culture, to be more agile, more tech-savvy, and more globally focused.
Right. But we also have to remember that this is a long-term thing. It's going to take time and effort to make it work. And we need to be aware of those potential pitfalls we talked about.
Definitely. And it's not just up to the EU either. Everyone needs to be involved. Governments, businesses, citizens. It's a collective effort to build a future where Europe is a leader in innovation, sustainability, and prosperity.
And that, my friends, is what EU Inc. is all about. A bold vision, a call to action, a chance to shape the future. Hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought, some insights to help you understand this exciting new proposal. So until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those entrepreneurial spirits burning bright.